Yeah, so they're gonna do or they already did we're gonna rewatch this in full so I don't miss anything, but this was they'd already done the campfire chat going over their goals and what they want to do for season 2. And then this is their actual, like, they have 2 designers on this from the dev team, so talking over what they actually did, and then they have patch notes. So we'll go through everything and kind of sort it all out and get that all built up. But yeah, let's see. I think in general, last campfire was good. This one overall, from what I saw, was good. So let's see if they can keep on this path. Yeah. Ah, so I think they updated this.
Season 2 will be our biggest update to Diablo 4 since launch.
Yeah.
The new quest line, events to play as you drive back the vampiric horde, unholy vampiric.
Can we kill the Diablo? Not yet.
Endgame encounters
No, no,
to test
no.
your skills.
And players will need to harness the enemy's own blood magic against them.
Whoa.
To end this new evil before it's
Best
too
thing of
late.
the 28
Diablo
months.
4, the season
PL
of
Box
blood.
plus plus.
In Season 2, the people of Sanctuary have a new danger to face. Invasion by an army of vampires.
Whoa.
This shadowy vampire cult has laid claim to large areas of the world and have begun
It's all the same
abducting innocent
mobs.
citizens
I don't like
to
the fact that
use
they
in
didn't
their
add new
rituals.
mobs, but I guess
Everyone's lives are at
if it's
risk.
mobs or new bosses, I'd rather have new
Season
bosses,
2,
huh?
Players are going to uncover a plot
It's not a Diablo
led
game now,
by
is it?
A new ancient vampire named Lord Sears.
Well, each Final Fantasy
Lord
isn't the
Sears
Final
is a
Fantasy,
remnant
is it?
of a
Because there's
lost
always a one
age.
after.
Before there were humans in Sanctuary, it was inhabited by the firstborn children of Anarius and Lilith, who are known as the Ancients.
But because of Inarius' actions,
Oh, the Ancients,
have their
yes.
powers drawn away from them. But some among them were not strictly subject to a true death.
Zir and his cohort were banished to sleep.
So the idea is that they're adding in, they're keeping Varshan, they're keeping Uber Lilith, and they're adding 4 new endgame bosses that have target farming. So you can actually farm uniques that you need from each one.
But they're not under Lord Sears' control.
Their marketing thing is you'll know someone who has a
stop Lord Sears' plans.
We'll encounter a variety of new
Say
characters
Uber
this
unique.
season, including a band of vampire hunters. One
Whoa.
with a particularly shadowy past.
Seek out Zir's army. Kill as many as you can.
Eris is a professional vampire hunter. She's crossed
Professional.
and recrossed the wilds of
She's a
Sanctuary,
pro.
putting an end to the undead since long before the events of Diablo 4.
I need to go after the magistrate, and you're going to have to come along.
Eris is played by actor Gemma Chan. It's exciting to see more film and television actors lending their talents to the video game world.
almost always
Gemma
end in
brings
their
a wealth of
respective games, so it
experience to the table
is
from
the
a
Final
wide
Fantasy of
variety
that
roles.
universe.
She was a great choice to breathe life into this.
Isn't it
character
all
of a
one
world-weary
universe
but
that keeps
determined
restarting
vampire
itself?
hunter with a lot of emotional complexity.
That's a bite mark. You're changing, aren't you?
I am changing.
No, from the depth of that wound, you should have already. She is strong. She's compassionate towards others, but she's also witnessed a lot of horror in her life, so she's pretty emotional.
They're going all in on this, like a
And
full on,
stubborn
like
and
high
fixed in her
quality
Oh, you're going to change.
filmic filter.
I'm sorry, but whatever's preventing your cravings won't last forever. They never does.
She realizes that the player character has these vampire traits, which makes him a useful tool, but potentially disposable one.
This is madness. Perhaps
Madness?
that's what it takes.
This is Diablo.
One of the core seasonal mechanics for this season are vampiric powers.
Yep.
Vampiric powers can be acquired by defeating blood seekers and minions of Lord Zir in order to acquire potent blood,
Sick.
which allows you to unlock or upgrade vampiric powers.
When you collect all of these various powers, they have costs, which are going to be detailed as part of the pack system. So armor pieces that you collect during the course of the season are going to have these packs associated with them.
There are
Right.
3 types of packs, and you can use the boons they provide. in
Diablo
order to
follows its
fuel the
lore
blood
just
seals
fine.
for
Kill
various
Diablo,
vampiric
capture
powers.
an SS,
You
hide
can
him away
combine
until
the
it breaks
power
out
of different
again.
blood seals in the Sanguine Circle, so long as you have the
Yeah, why
appropriate
don't they ever learn to
combination of packs in order
befriend
to power them.
the
One thing we've
primevals?
really tried hard to do is to provide powers that enhance every build so that there's no one right way to play when pursuing that vampire fantasy.
There's one in particular that I like where as the player dashes, they turn to a cloud of bats, and they'll curse creatures they pass through along the way.
Whoa.
As you kill those creatures, you're going to actually steal their souls. When you use certain abilities on your
Whoa.
character, all
Steal
of
their
those souls
souls,
are unleashed,
man.
dealing devastating damage to nearby creatures.
There's also an ability
Damn.
called Rising Moon, where you can stack basic skills, and after you reach a maximum number of stacks, you go into a vampiric blood rage. If you can't get enough of bats, there's even a vampire power that allows you to summon a bat companion.
What?
Take a bite out of your enemies and have a chance to stun them.
Basically ravens.
Lord Zir's
Now every
army
class
is
can have
pushing across
ravens.
Sanctuary in an event called the Blood Harvest,
Can the
which will always
can
be
the
active
bat
somewhere on the map, but
companion
will change
collect
locations
gold
in a
for me?
cyclical way.
Blood harvests are large-scale open-world events where vampires
How about that?
overwhelmed an area in the hopes of enslaving the populace,
Possibly, Nem,
harvesting their
yeah.
blood, and siring more
New
vampires.
season looks good.
Players will venture into these areas to rescue prisoners.
We'll see shortly.
Stop sinister rituals.
Whoa,
and
what's
hunt
up,
for
Warp?
high-value enemies. Of course, they'll be rewarded for their efforts with a variety of new items, as well as the potent blood that fuels their vampiric powers.
In Season 2, the Season of Blood, we're going to be adding 5 new returning endgame bosses for players to engage
No, this is the
with
stream from
once they get
today.
into World Tiers 3 and 4. Players will be able to
Then
earn
an
the materials to summon
extended
these
like
bosses by
intro
creating
video I wanted to
whispers
watch, and then
and by
we'll look
killing
at
Helltide events.
the
We have some new
details, and then we can
enemies
jump
with
into the patch
powerful
notes, which are out
elemental
now.
attacks, giving players more reason to seek out and equip gear that enhances their resistances.
What sets these new in-game bosses
baby.
apart is that they offer a new way to
What's up,
farm
baby
uniques.
girl?
So if there's a build-defining unique you're after,
Little,
you'll be able to target
little.
specific bosses.
And our most challenging boss that we're going to be adding as part of Season 2 is also going to have an opportunity to drop
Spank that
extremely
puppy butt.
rare unique items that players have been hunting for.
Extremely unique, not just
We're
unique,
also going to be adding some quality of life updates.
not uber
in
unique,
Season 2.
extremely unique.
First of which is we're going to be taking our gem system and making it so when gems drop for the player, you're actually collecting materials. They're going to be stored
Whoa.
differently. They're not going to go into your inventory the same way.
You did promise your
Technically,
peeps
it
some
seems
druid
like inventory
content.
space to players
I was
can
thinking about
use.
playing Sork.
As long as you finish the prologue,
Oh
you
my
can now
God,
choose to skip
dude.
the rest
I
of the
did
campaign
promise that, didn't
and dive
I?
straight into creating a seasonal character. If you previously unlocked a mount in Diablo 4, it will be immediately available to use when you begin your journey through the Season of Blood. And we've made it so that renown rewards persist through seasons, so that the reward is now account bound.
As we do with every new season,
Wow.
we'll be adding a new season journey and a new battle pass filled with new, like vampiric themed cosmetics for them to collect. And we'll also be adding some new town portal cosmetics, both in the free and paid versions of our battle pass in season 2.
Wow.
We'll also be making a number of other changes to the game, updating unique powers and items, reviewing legendary aspects for different classes. We're going to be updating stats like our resistance values across the game, and a number of other balance tweaks to make sure the game is as fun as possible for players.
One of the most exciting things for me about working on seasons is that Sanctuary is a big place and there's a lot going on. The primevals and the angelic forces are still very much in play, but I think players are going to enjoy seeing some more human scale dramas play out.
Diablo 4's second season will be our largest content update yet, but we're only getting started. Along with providing new quest lines, powers, and events each season, we'll continue to improve upon established systems by listening to player feedback to make your adventure in Sanctuary the best it can be.
Some of these
Incredibly
dialogues are a
excited
little
for you to
stiff,
explore more corners of
but
Sanctuary.
I think the
Come join
message
us
is
in the
good. You
hunt.
can tell they care. Rawr. All right, let's get into it. They are silent. They are silent.
For Diablo 4 Campfire Chat. I am Adam Fletcher. I'm the community
Oh, that lapel
leader for
sounds
the Diablo
terrible.
franchise, and I'm joined by 2 people here. One of them familiar face, one of them a new face. Feel
Lead
free to
class
introduce
designer
yourself.
Adam
Yes.
Jackson,
Hi, everyone. I'm
associate
Charles
game
Dunn. I'm
designer
an associate
Charles
game
Dunn.
designer working on the live balance team.
Ah,
And hey everybody, I'm Adam Jackson. I'm the lead class designer for Diablo 4.
ow.
And as you guys know, like last week we talked a lot about Season 2. We actually revealed kind of like all the details about
My
Season
ears.
2. We went
Def
into
good,
a bunch
def
of different
good.
updates that are going to be coming with Season 2. And then this stream was specifically for class
What's up,
updates,
Deadpool?
talking about resistances, talking about updates to damage buckets.
One
and
button
more.
accidental
We actually
press. I
have
think
a
they probably
lot
fixed
to
that.
talk about. Hopefully, hopefully you guys like numbers because I brought some designers. Hopefully you guys like to hear about all these changes that we're going to be going through. But at
Right.
the same time, we're also going to be talking about some future updates that are coming for the game as well. We will talk about the first update that's going to be hitting.
So quickly, all right. The big ticket items. Big ticket items were resistances being useless in Torment World Tier 4. Then all builds requiring crit and vulnerable. All top tier builds relied on runaway mechs and bugs, essentially, right? Like Bone Sphere, any of the barbarian builds, all of them relied on either some kind of runaway calculation or a bug, to be honest. And most of the builds that were good just weren't really, I mean, they weren't really as anywhere near as good. And a lot of times when they were buffing and nerfing, things kind of got broke. Stash sucks. And inventory sucks. Which kind of gems is on top of that as well. And then obviously there's just some, like, a lot of low hanging fruit. Minions feel bad. Channeling feels bad. Abilities with flat damage numbers, like a base number, feel bad. Mounts feel bad. Nothing to do past level 70, right? So those kind of like the things that we're looking for out of this. And we got some of these in the high level. Yeah, and I guess like gameplay challenge improvements would be another good one. That's true. So like affixes that aren't fun. Lightning Storm. Death Pulse, etc. And then like too much CC, which also leads itself into everyone needs what was it, unbreakable, unbeatable, unbreakable, whatever it is allows you to move. Unstoppable, is that what it is? Unstoppable. So you basically have all these. So like this is like all the major issues that they said that they were going to adjust, and the big one is they said they were going to fix resistances in season 2. So we know that that was the goal all along. So if this is what we're looking for out of it, let's see what we actually get when we get to the real numbers and we get to the real life. What can they give us to save Diablo
After
4?
Season 2 launches, which is patch 1.2.
Too many substats. That's a good one as well.
Hitting on that at the end of the actual stream.
Too many substats.
Before we kind of like jump
like damage with frost, damage to frosted, damage while frosted, damage while anyone's frosted, damage from anyone frosted around you, damage when you're cold outside, damage when the AC is on.
Yeah, we can start jumping to slides. So the class team and really the whole Diablo 4 team has been very busy with improving the game. So our strategy for Season of Blood is kind of a 5-point strategy. The high-level goal here was we were focusing on addressing.
I'll check it when we finish reviewing tests.
Systemic improvements to the game. We wanted to
From
improve
Comic-Con.
the whole foundation of the game from the ground up as much as we could.
5-point strategy.
So our strategy for the Season of Blood.
Update elemental resistances. Cool.
Elemental resistances. We've heard feedback.
We like that.
You know, they weren't quite hitting the mark that we wanted to, and so we're making some changes there.
Remind me, Tess, in like
more exciting and impactful.
In an hour and 10 minutes.
We're also
there a new class? There's not a new class.
And looking at improvements to address commonly talked about issues that we've kind of heard from the
community and
from
good.
Ourselves. We're also updating damage buckets and the underlying math of how the game works to make it a little more even.
This is good.
Between builds and classes. And then the final
this
one
could
is
be good.
All these changes a bonus and making it feel like
this
is
kind of nondescript and could be really good.
From the ground up. So I think we'll take it over with Charles first to talk about elemental.
Yeah. So these are easy wins. These are like
resistances. So currently in the Season of the Malignant on live right now, resistances are calculated in a way called inverse multiplicative. So what this means is that if you have, say, 20% poison resistance, and then you grab another piece of gear that has 20% more, your character stat sheet will actually show that you have 36% poison resistance. And that's because there's a diminishing returns. On the more resistance you get, it will never quite get you up to 100%.
I am a wizard.
It's always kind of like 20% of the, the remaining amount.
Yeah,
so
exactly, Silverhawk.
100%. And this means that you can stack resistances essentially infinitely. There's no hard cap. You could get resistance on every piece.
I mean, there's a realistic cap.
Contribute to reducing that damage that you're taking. Additionally, right now, armor contributes both to elemental damage reduction. It kind of gets factored into this calculation.
I don't know why I said inverse multiplicative. Just say there's DRs.
From just enemies' regular attacks instead of the elemental
like
attacks.
a little like design schooly.
So going forward into the Season of Blood, resistances are going to change how they're calculated, and they're now going to be additive. So that means if you have the 20% poison resistance and you have another piece that has 20% more, you're going to have 40% resistance on your character stat sheet exactly as you would expect.
Is there a cap?
Although, since this adds up additively now, we do need to add a cap. So the resistances are going to be capped at a baseline of 70%.
Resistances capped at 70%.
Up to 70% resistance. There are some effects in the game
can go to 85%
up to
with new effects.
With various effects that increase your max resistance, but those are rather rare because they are quite powerful. Additionally, armor is also going to only affect physical damage.
You can like choose where you get your resistances then, right? So like if you have you know, like poison and lightning and fire and frost. Now, because they have, if you remember, like certain like amulets will have two elements on them or one element, and then rings will each have two different elements. And then choosing how you get to your 70% makes more sense. And then if you get resistances from your Paragon boards or other buffs, then you can then free up some other choices. I think there's a question of how much you're going to get from your jewelry now and how much that'll matter. By the way, my biggest gripe with resistances, aside from them having constant DRs built in from baseline, which is really weird, they also still have to solve the problem of world tier. There's still, this is one of the biggest issues with resistances before, was that there is a major negative downscaler on your resistances as you go up in world tier. So world tier 1 has like almost no impact on resistance, but world tier 4, there's like a massive nerf to how effective your resistances can be. So while it's good to do these baseline changes, you also want to look at your difficulty level scaling on the resistances to make sure that doesn't make all this moot anyways.
Damage. As it used to do both, it's now only going to be calculated when you're taking physical damage and not when you're taking elemental damage.
Armor is only physical.
Additionally, to kind of make everyone have a baseline level of resistances, we're going to be updating rings so that they have all resistance at all times.
Rings amulets have all resistance.
But rings used to have
only two,
elemental resistance. They could have, say, fire resistance plus cold resistance.
Okay.
Now they'll have all resistance along with one random one, such as fire resistance.
All right.
And in order to really make sure that your character can survive a lot of these elemental damage that the monsters are going to be thrown out at you, you definitely want to be able to stack a lot of this resistance. But there's a lot of options to get it. You can get it through gear affixes, through Paragon points, skill tree nodes, as well as consumables,
glyphs,
and a variety of other sources. So let's talk a little bit about the overall impact that you're going to see as a player. First and most importantly, resistances are going to matter a lot more.
Bold statement. Bold statement. Very bold. Put your peepers out for this one. We shall see.
In Season of Blood. They are just going to be a very important part of building your character. You're definitely going
like I said, you still have to think about the world tier downscaling
as you're getting into the late game and fighting the most dangerous monsters. They're also going to be a little bit more complex. There's a little bit of a puzzle to solve here with hitting that cap.
Right, where you get it from.
Going to get, you know, resistance. Yeah, resistance stonks for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like how it was for early Diablo 2, right? You just needed to hit
a little bit about our overall goals
a minimum
for the
value.
Resistance system, and I think it's important to talk about goals when we're talking about these really big systemic changes, because as we're going through and tuning,
players
the
should be able to hit 70%.
I mean, there's a lot in Season of Blood, obviously.
At level 80. I wonder how they're calculating that. Like, is that with
these goals? So if it turns out that some are
like uniques and legendary powers
hitting these goals, then we're going to be reevaluating them.
Excluded?
That's why we really want to share our goals for these systems with you. So the first one
is it like a sorceress with their mega resistance legendary
cap at
level 80?
For most resistances. This isn't going to be something that you're chasing up to level 100 and you need absolute best possible gear in order to hit this cap. It's going to be something that's very achievable for most players as they're getting into that late game around level 80-ish. Our second goal is that all players, even if they're not paying too close attention to this, shouldn't fall too far behind. That's why we're adding the all resist to rings and amulets. This is a failsafe to ensure that players will always have some baseline minimum amount of resistance, so they're not getting completely destroyed by elemental damage if they're not really optimizing this.
I mean, this feels like a little PowerPointy. Like, these are the things that we want to have happen.
And finally, this is going to be a puzzle to solve for players as you're building your character, and there's a lot of paths to solve it. This is,
I guess additive does make elixirs and incenses more interesting too, right? Because then it's not a drop in the bucket. Oh, increases poison resistance by 30%, max poison resistance by 6%, and experience by 5%, which we know is now going to be multiplicative. That XP is going to be a lot more valuable. Max poison resist by 6%. So it raises your cap and gives you resistance at the same time.
A situation where you need the absolute best possible gear to solve this. It's
physical resistance thing now. It's just armor now.
You can get affixes of resistance through Paragon, elixirs,
like every other RPG.
Gems in particular is very important. And it's all about optimizing your character to find the best way for you to reach the resistance cap rather than can you reach it at all. I really want to highlight this elixir here. We've updated all of the elemental resist elixirs.
I mean, this is nice.
So
This
they
is
also
cool.
include, you can see here,
I can vibe with that.
maximum poison resistance increased by 6%. And that's really impactful, especially because the resistance that you get kind of in excess of 70% is disproportionately valuable. Just to give you an example, let's say you're going from 0% resistance up to 5% resistance.
What's up, Sudsy?
What
So
that
far
means
good.
is, well, you're taking
So far good.
5% less damage. You would have taken 100 damage, now you take 95.
In cap,
But if
the
you're
cap crease
already
feels
at, say,
small.
70% resistance.
Yeah, I mean,
cap, and you go up to 76%.
70% should
what that
hopefully
means is
apply
if
better
you
than
were
it did
to take
before,
100
right?
Poison damage, well, at 70%, you would have taken actually 30. But now at 76, you're only taking 24 because you have 76% resistance. And that's actually a 20% damage reduction. You're gaining a lot more effective life whenever you add that extra cap at the end. So really getting to that cap and pushing above the cap is a great way to give you a better fighting chance against some of these late game bosses who all have these elemental effects. And yeah, these elixirs are going to be a key part of your arsenal to take on those late game bosses.
Yeah, and incenses too. And maybe party synergies too. I don't know.
I think we want to move on
to the next
to the.
I don't know. I'm a little bit underwhelmed by resistances. They didn't talk about the global difficulty scalars on resistance. That as you go up in world tier, your resistance effectiveness, like the magic damage you take, is increased because you went up a world tier. That is kind of like a, like putting on a raincoat, even though it's still raining. Like you still have to worry about the overall. But I think in general, it's a step in the right direction. Having constant compounding diminishing returns all along the way never really helped resistances.
So uniques,
Yeah.
yes. Adam,
So-
take it away.
Yeah, so firstly, talking a little bit about those goals really quick. Something that is really important to me and the team is that...
Like, I don't know that
we're
fixes
talking to you
resistances.
about
It's
the
just
updates we're doing to the game, that you
better
understand
than
kind
it
of
was.
why we're making these changes and what our goals are, because you're going to see as we go through all of these, we're changing like a lot of how the underlying math and other systems of the game work. And the odds are high that we don't nail everything perfectly. But if you understand what we're trying to do and we're more transparent about that, then when you're having discussions with each other, when you're giving feedback to us, they can just be a little bit more high level and better sources of information when you also understand why we're doing things. So now moving on to uniques, let's get into it. So generally, we feel, and
Let's get into it.
They're just not exciting enough for the end game chase items. They're
True, and their
really,
stats
really awesome
suck.
and cool. They're just not hitting the mark a lot of the time. Too often players really don't feel good when they drop, and really what
If they
is an
drop.
alarm bell for me personally is that when there's a unique for your build and it's intended to be good for that build, like say like a fireball unique for a fireball sorcerer, and then a fireball sorcerer doesn't even want
It's
that.
harder to get a unique item? No, it's
That's because
easier.
it
You'll see
happens,
why.
whether it's because the unique effect isn't good enough or the stats on the gear aren't good enough. We want to make sure these are exciting and awesome and attractive to get. So we did a giant pack.
Yeah, some of the big issues with uniques, one is that they're hard to get for some people, right? There are people that wanted to get Ring of Men Down or Tempest Roar or whatever else, and they spent weeks and weeks and months trying to get that one thing they needed for the build. They couldn't get it. In some cases, the uniques didn't really do enough. They weren't really enough or interesting or powerful, and even the build that was intended to use that unique power didn't, because there were better options. And the third option, the third problem, which was probably one of the more silent but deadly options, the issues that faced uniques, was that the stats on them sucked. There were unique boots that didn't have movement speed on them. There were unique rings that didn't have any bonus stats like crit or damage output on them. There were weapons that had no offense. So there were unique weapons like the frickin' what is it, the Deathless Visage, or the scythe that does frost and darkness. There were unique weapons that had no offensive stats on them at all, which means that you were putting a unique in that slot, but you were losing out on key important stats that your build needed. So like putting the unique on was a huge negative because the stats sucked so much.
And we updated nearly every single unique in the game.
But they updated nearly every single unique, so we'll see what that means.
So we have a fourfold strategy, and I'm going to go through here using some fake examples of kind of what we did.
Like,
and
why
then
would I
we're
want a
gonna go
unique
through some
boots that don't
real
have movement
examples
speed
of
on
actual
them? That's
changes
the
that we
only
made to the game.
place I can get that
So the
stat.
first one, and by the way, we're
You
also
know?
not just doing this in Season of Blood, but this is kind of how we're going to be looking at making uniques.
Fake
unique,
examples.
going
So these are
forward.
not real.
So the first one is adding new stats to them. So as an example here, you know, increased
These are not
memory
real.
duration isn't really a stat that exists in the game that can be on gear, but it could potentially exist on a unique. The next one is
Okay.
doing larger existing stat ranges. So as
I don't know what this is for. Hey, this is something we have. This could be cool, but it's not real. So they're saying that they want to have more unique stats. They already kind of had this, right? There were, what was it, Lucky Hit with shadow damage on the Greaves of the Empty Tomb. There were some uniques that had unique stats that didn't exist anywhere else, which was super cool. It doesn't, they're kind of marketing it as a thing that's like brand new, but it's not. But it's good. It's a good thing that they should be doing more of, that you would want to have part of, right? Like even like a lot of the shape-shifting ones for Druid had unique things for shape-shifting. Like that stuff is really cool.
As an example here, you know, bonus fire damage would normally roll between like
Larger
60 and
existing
25%.
stat
Let's make
ranges.
these numbers
Okay.
up. But you know, on a unique, it could be between 30 and 45%. or some even higher
Unique
number, right? Like, you can mess with
stats.
those
We like
ranges and
that.
make them, more attractive.
Larger ranges.
The next one is overriding slot rules. So the example here, you know, weapons normally
Normal.
can't roll cooldown reduction.
So even more
It's a really
substats?
powerful
Yeah.
stat on an item, but on a unique, it potentially could.
Override slot rules.
And then the last one is updating unique effects. This is really like actually updating the special thing that the unique does that adds to your player power. So the example here, you know, a unique could normally require hitting enemies from behind on Tuesdays, but now it'll just work when you hit enemies, right? We just make it easier and more consistent.
Removing weird conditions.
Damage on Tuesdays. It's my favorite affix.
Me too. Tuesday's a good day.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay,
now let's do
actual
those
examples.
changes. So the first one is Fists of Fate.
What do we got?
This is our favorite random item where everything.
This is the gloves that you needed to have. Basically, it was not worth it to ever run these gloves until you got to like about 295 or 300%, and then some builds could run it. But again, here's one of the major problems with uniques in Diablo 4. Gloves are offensive stats, right? So you had like your character sheet, your gloves, your amulet, your rings, and then like your main hand, offhand were like your only ways to get offensive stats, right? Like boots, pants, chest, helm, all of those can't have offensive stats on them. So you were forced to get them on specific slots. So again, here I have a great example of what I'm talking about. We have an item in the offensive stat slot. It is on gloves, which means it has crit damage. It has crit chance. It has attack speed. It has overall damage. It has specific elemental damage. Like it has all of these specific things that make you stronger, that make you do more damage, right? Overall, and are very important for certain builds. And this is in the offensive slot. And this unique has none of those. The 4 stat slots it has are all chances to proc something, right? And so if you're going to make me sacrifice a slot where I can only get those specific stats, like specifically attack speed, I think could only be on rings and glove. So if you take one of the 3 slots I can put it on and take that away from me because I'm doing a unique, there should be something that makes up for that loss, right? That's one of the main issues that I had with uniques in general, is that they weren't very mindful of that in general. So again, you have a slot here that none of those offensive stats exist here. You have a chance to gain damage, or you have a chance to immobilize, chance to heal, chance to gain resource, and chance to daze, and a chance to deal bonus damage, right? Versus like, do I want 20% more crit, 12% more attack speed, 13% more cooldown reduction on my storm skills, right? Versus these like, or a chance to immobilize. So I think that was kind of the part that made it really weird for me on uniques. So they've got this here.
Hit and chance based.
Chance to gain damage, which is
issues
new.
With this unique is that, you know, because a lot of your stats on your gloves are damage related, and this one doesn't really give you that direct just damage power.
Boom.
We're taking
Okay,
one of the
good.
effects and changing it to a new stat that doesn't exist anywhere else in the game. That's basically a chance to give you a damage buff for a certain amount of time.
Good.
So now this will make up for some of that, you know, not giving you your, you know, skill rank stats or other things, but now it gives you some damage.
That's nice.
Next one, we've got the Grasp of Shadow. This is a rogue unique that's themed around summoning shadow clones to do damage. You can see on the left, that's the old version, the shadow clone damage.
Vulnerable damage, attack speed, rank of all core
14 to
skills,
21%.
attack speed,
Now it's going
dexterity,
between 31 and
shadow clone damage way higher. Cool. Good. Okay, they get it.
Next one, we've got Hellhammer. We've actually got a couple of things
They
going
get
on
it.
here. You can see here, first one is, again, increasing the stat ranges. The damage to burning enemies goes from 14 to, what is that, 28%.
Yeah, exactly,
Now it's going
Silverhog.
to 42 to 70%.
Make
So
them
a lot
good.
more damage to burning enemies. And then the next one is
4
actually
ranks of upheaval,
overriding
yeah.
the slot rule and adding a new stat that can't normally be on weapons, which is ranks to upheaval. And
Cool.
when we start going later in the presentation, you're going to learn that skill ranks are really, really powerful in the Season of Blood and going
Good.
forward. So this is going to make this item much
A
more attractive.
unique that focuses on upheaval gives you
And then the last
upheaval
one, updating
ranks.
Unique effects. This is another
Wow.
very unique Ancient's Oath. So before
They love
was a
using
skill
barbarian
that
uniques
launched
for
2
this.
additional chains, which it's still doing, and is pretty neat. And before it was that it slowed enemies that got hit. And you know, we found really that adding a slowed enemies isn't really quite the powerful effect that we want. So instead of doing a slow, now it's going to give you a whole bunch of multiplicative bonus damage to anything that you grab.
Okay, so the question then becomes, how does this get calculated now? If they're changing damage buckets, if you say that when I steel grasp someone with Ancient's Oath and that target takes 50% increased damage from me for 3 seconds, how does that get calculated? That's the important question.
So again, just straight up a lot more powerful than it was before. All right, now we're also going to be adding some new legendaries and uniques to Season 2. So
Dolmen Stone, Scoundrel's Leathers, Flicker Step. Are we Path of Exile now?
So this first one is called Flicker Step. This one is basically when you evade through enemies, you're going to reduce your ultimate cooldown by a pretty chunky amount.
Okay, so let's see.
Here, as the player
She's got her ultimate.
enemies, their ultimate cooldown.
That just removed
When you evade through enemies,
28, 27, 26. That removed like 10 seconds.
You can see here as the player is evading through enemies,
Per evade.
their ultimate cooldown is
Wait. If I have multiple evade charges and I run Flicker Step, can I bing bing bong and remove like 30 seconds off my ult? Attacks reduce evade cooldown. All stats, movement speed on unique boots. We like that. Ultimate skill damage for a unique that focuses on ultimate damage. We like that. Damage reduction from close enemies increase. Okay, so it's a defensive stat slot. It has defensive stats on it. It has movement speed. Generally what you would get from other boots. I don't think boots can have ultimate skill damage, can they? It's been a while. And then you can evade and reset the cooldown on your ultimate. However, it looks like you might be fixed to attacks reduce evades cooldown. You can't have multi-charges on it. Because it is boots, but still.
Getting a lot shorter. So you could, you know, try and create an ultimate build where you're just focused on using your ultimate.
And it's not per enemy hit. It's just as long as you hit one, right?
The next one is Scoundrel's Leathers. This is our new.
Oh, it is per enemy hit.
This one says that when you have inner sight active and you have that unlimited
Okay.
energy, then on cast, when you cast a core skill, you have a chance to spawn a random trap. And this random trap can also be death trap. So it's pretty cool.
40% trap skill damage. Damage to enemies affected by trap skills. 8% damage reduction from enemies affected by trap skills. Dodge chance. While you have unlimited energy from inner sight, your core skills have a chance to spawn cal traps, poison trap, or death trap. Which doesn't look like it has an internal cooldown either. While you have unlimited energy from inner sight, your core skills have a high chance to spawn one of your 3 traps. 2 of those do pretty good damage too. So nice. It is a chest armor item that has damage reduction on it. And, well, so this is the other question, right? Because in Season 1 and preseason, chest items needed to have basically 4 defensive stats on them. It was very hard to run a damage stat on your chest or your pants because you needed so much damage reduction to survive that you would lose out on it. So typically people ran like damage reduction close, damage reduction distance, and like max health on chest. So this is a unique chest item that has 1, technically 2, but dodge chance kind of sucks. Damage reduction from enemies affected by traps and dodge chance, and then 2 offensive stats built into it. This could be another situation where it's hard to run this because you're limited on your other choices. You can't run defensive stats on like gloves or rings or amulet or main hand or offhand because those are fixed slots with fixed stats. So I don't know, but the power is cool. It just depends on whether rogues will be able to survive with 1.5 stats for defense on a chest item.
And last but not least, this is one of my favorite ones, is Dolmen
Druid.
Stone. This is for the Druid, and it says that when you cast hurricane and then you cast boulder while your hurricane is active, your boulder will actually
Yo.
on the hurricane. And yes, you can actually have
That's
multiple
cool.
going on at once.
Yo, boulder build?
It's pretty awesome.
Okay, and this is an amulet. Max life, resource gen, nature magic skill cooldown reduction, and ranks of wrath. 1 defensive stat on amulet, but the rest are pretty decent. The effect is cool.
All right, next we're going to be talking about class improvement. So this is the next part of our strategy, which is really looking at the issues. That
Hopefully,
the community is
Silverog,
talking
hopefully.
about with
You
every
should,
class
Tess.
And
Before you actually jump in, because I know we're a lot of people are seeing the item levels on some of those uniques.
Oh, yeah.
And stuff. And I know last
600.
week we talked about item level being 920, but then there's some of the uniques that we showed earlier, for instance, actually ended up showcasing like 925 or other numbers beyond. So
yeah, I wanted to be clear.
Yeah.
Yeah, 925 is going to be the new maximum.
925 is new eye level.
925
Cap.
is the max eye power you can get to.
yeah.
Okay.
So it's us clarifying essentially last week where we said 920, but it's actually 925.
Yeah.
So we just wanted to clear that up with everyone
Pass off.
to make sure that people understood.
Yep. All right, so next let's talk about the uniques that you can get in the game. So as you know,
Okay.
slide.
So this is where the target farming comes in.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so
Based on the
here we're just
endgame
gonna give you a
bosses,
preview
they have a
here so you can have
specific
target
loot
farming.
list.
And to be clear here, with these new bosses that we're adding in the Season of Blood, these are the uniques that the boss will be able to drop. Now, you can still get uniques from all content in the game. It's just a rare chance to get any of them, but you have a much higher chance to get these specific uniques off of these specific bosses. So here you can see a list. That was the first one. Next is Varshan.
Varshan.
So if you're chasing any of these, you know you want your Staff of Endless Rage or your, Mad Wolf's Glee as a druid. This is who you're going to be target farming. Next, we've got Lord Zir. So here's the list. We can stay here for a few seconds and just
We'll post these lists on the site so that players can actually reference.
Okay, so there's a specific unique you need. You can farm this, and they also said that the summon materials for each of these bosses can be traded.
Target farming, like what can I actually target farm off of these new bosses? And so we wanted to make sure that we actually showcase that list
Cool.
here, so every player can actually.
Hey, there's Ring of Men down for you.
The uniques that they can actually target.
East and Ice is what you want. Next question is, how easy is it to
you can get there.
get these materials, and how often can you kill them?
And then last one is Duriel. So here's all the uniques. And
These
a
are
lot of
new
the uniques
ones.
Here, by the way, on Duriel
Tempest
are-
Roar. Oh my god, Tempest Roar has to be the #1 most complained about unique that you can't get in Season 1 and Season 0 for druids. And they put it on the hardest to access pinnacle boss in Season 2.
for the season.
Along with all the new
ones.
stuff.
And then there's
Oh.
these are the Uber uniques that have a higher chance to drop from him. So this is his loot table.
What up, Boz?
Give yourself a shako.
Yeah, Uber uniques will definitely be more cheap.
And they drop Uber unique, so there you go.
Rare, but if you're getting Duriel on farm and you're killing them a bunch, you're probably going to be able to see one of them throughout a season.
Most definitely we'll be able to see one if you're really farming on Duriel, and at the same time,
They need to like equalize their mic volume. It's all over the place.
Actually, we'll end up having Uber uniques this season.
Yeah, does Uber Lilith have a loot
And-
table? Good
and again,
question.
these bosses are available in Season 2, but they're
It was
also
just the
available
achievement
in
and the
Eternal
mount.
Realm on day 1 with
Yes.
October 17th. So.
All right, so now let's get to the class improvements. So yeah, our strategy here was addressing issues with each class that the community is talking about. These changes are mostly unique to each class, and they're meant to target specific pain points that players have been having. What you'll be seeing here today, by the way, in this presentation are just some examples. It's not a list of all the changes. If we did that,
Specific pain
we
points.
will be coming out with patch notes and a blog explaining things pretty soon right after the stream. We're going to give you a preview kind of what you can expect.
Yeah, 2 Tempest Roars in Season 0? Heck yeah, dude.
So the first one is a general change, and this is that Fortify amounts, when you gain Fortify, are going to be changed from being based on your base life to your maximum life. And what this means...
Whoa! Yo, this is actually massive. This is so good. Fortify amounts are changed from being based on base life to maximum life. That is going to be insanely good. And one of the big problems with Fortify, by the way, is that you're not considered fortified until the amount of Fortify is equal to or greater than your current amount of life, which means that if you had more max life, it then technically got harder and harder to get to the fortified state because the Fortify amount you were getting was based on base life, not maximum life, which made the tanky builds kind of weird in that. So this is going to like significantly increase the amount of Fortify you get from Fortify abilities, and it means you can maintain the Fortify stat as well.
Increasing your maximum life is going to make these effects stronger, and
that's really good.
Yeah, I think this is a really important change for any kind of build that's trying to, build really tanky. They want to build Fortify, they want to build max life, and previously, whenever
okay, so it went from 368 Fortify on the Shout to 677, so like 1.8 times. Like 1.8, 1.9 times more.
Based on your base life, building more maximum life actually meant that it was harder to get your character fully
per
fortified,
ability, per source.
more life to fortify through. And so with this change, you can see here in this example on the left, pretty much the same character, almost the exact same life total. Before, you would get
that's
about
nice.
368 Fortify
That's a W.
with this effect. And now the exact same effect, exact same character, now gets 677. So almost double amount. If you are building a lot of maximum life like this character is, you're just going to see a lot more Fortify values, which means it's a lot easier for your character to get into that powerful Fortify.
D4, good.
All right, next we're going to talk about some class adjustments here. So during our Season of the Malignant live stream, if you remember, we talked about how sometimes we're going to need to make adjustments to things that are overperforming, right? So I want you to imagine for a little bit that you have your perfect game that you're creating, right? Where your power level of everything in the game is here, balance-wise, right? Everything's exactly the same. Firstly, we live in the real world, so no game's really exactly like this. It's more like something like this, right? Where you have a range where, your lowest power thing and your highest power thing are within here. And this is actually better for a healthier game, because if everything's exactly the same, then, your power level can get kind of flat and boring, right? If like Fireball does the exact same as Upheaval, does the exact same as everything else, your game can end up kind of flat. So some variance is pretty good, right? But then sometimes, when things get out of this range, that's kind of a sweet spot. If something is like way up here, then this can warp the design and warp what players are doing, and warp even the perception in front of the game.
Yes.
So one of the things that we had talked about during that stream is when we have things that are up here, usually this is due to either like unplanned synergies, or something that's bugged or working unintended. It can get
mostly
out of
a bug.
And so we're committed now that when things get out of range too
far,
bleeds. We're going to bring it back to that normal realm where everything is.
Right. So like, he's right. There's always going to be this high and low. You want there to be lows because there are people that like chasing the bottom, right? They like me, they like niche builds. They like trying to make the bad thing work, or, that sort of thing. There should be highs because it sets a benchmark for everybody, right? Like how does my build compare to Bone Spear or to like Whirlwind Barb or whatever, right? Like how does this compare to this? How fast can Bone Spear kill Uber Lilith versus how fast can Incinerate Sork kill Uber Lilith? It can't, is the answer. So they got that there. But then you have these kind of crazy outliers where you have things that are just so bad they can't be used anywhere. And this needs to be removed, right? This can't happen. There are some builds that just can't scale out of that. Not good. And there's also problems like with like overpower and things like that, where they hit a very big ceiling because they stop scaling, unlike other stats. Anything that doesn't rely on crit or vulnerable in Season 1 and Season 0 never actually was as good because it would hit a theoretical maxes while flat value. Then you have things that are bugged, which they, in general, I would say they were pretty good about stamping out. Gore's Grasp or whatever, or the Bleed Barbarian, some of the Necromancer weirdnesses with dropping blood orbs that would create bone spirits, and if you sat around for an hour, you could spawn enough blood orbs so you could one-shot Uber Lilith. All that is there. So that, I mean, in theory, this is correct. I think that there's definitely a question of what are we doing about the stat changes, the overall stat buckets, so that that range is a realistic goal and not just, ha ha ha, if you don't use these 2 stats, you don't win.
In the Season of Blood, we're really looking at 3 situations here where this happens. Sometimes builds and playstyles can just dramatically be outperforming others.
Yeah.
Another one is fixing unintended interactions that result in extreme outliers. These are usually like bugs or other things.
A lot
like
of
that.
there.
And then designs, and this is kind of future proofing, but we're looking at
Well,
designs that
low,
have the
not so
potential for
booty.
infinite
7-sided
power
strike.
So
True.
that going forward, particularly when we're adding leaderboards into the game, we really want
Yeah,
to make
this is
sure
what
that power levels of things
the
isn't
runaway
too
calculations that I was talking about earlier.
particularly for too long of a time. So we're gonna
Or
be
this
more
times
committed
that
to
times that times that times that times that times that
So,
times
in the
that
Season
times
of
that.
Blood, we
And
don't
eventually,
really
under the
have
right
virtually any
conditions,
of
they would
these,
just
and to
be
clear, the
infinite
overwhelming
damage.
majority of our changes are going to be buffs, but these are some adjustments to get ahead of first to make sure that those power levels are kind of the same. We can go to the next slide here.
Okay, he just said that everything's going to be mostly buffs. Let's
So
see.
the first one is Necromancer. If you've played a Bone Spear Necro, you
The first one is a nerf.
probably saw this coming a little bit. But Ossified Essence, your key
Right?
passive, we're reducing your damage bonus from 1
Holy.
to 0.5%. And to be clear here, even after this change, this key passive is still probably a contender for being the strongest one in the game. It's really, really powerful.
It's true. It does break a lot of things. This and then the grasping fingers, whatever it was called, that give you bonus crit and crit chance and crit damage when you used the corpse tendrils. Those 2 together made almost every build relating to bone too much. So Ossified Essence damage bonus per past 50 cut in half. 50% nerf.
A ton of damage.
Hopefully
And
this
really what the subsets
includes
do actually, and you'll
buffs
see when you get to look
elsewhere.
at our patch notes, it gives us some room to add power in other places in Bone Necro.
Okay, there you go.
Rather than it all being
Him and I are
centered
thinking
on the
alike.
key passive. We're also
Bone Graph,
reducing the
Legendary
Bone
Paragon
Graph,
node,
Legendary
Maximum
Paragon
Essence.
node, max essence per stack a little bit. You're still gonna be able to get a ton
24
of
to
maximum essence in the game,
16.
but we're just bringing these down a little bit.
2 big nerfs
And
to
then the
bone.
next 2, these are going to be kind of themed. We've got the Barbarian, the Supreme Wrath of the Berserker. This is the one where while you're
We're doing mostly buffs. The first page. Next slide, please. We're nerfing all of these.
Wrath of the Berserker is active. When you spend Fury, you get a damage bonus on.
You're
Berserker,
boned if you don't use those? Yeah.
And this could scale infinitely, and now we're just adding.
Used to be.
To it.
As long as there's
And then
other
the next one,
buffs.
Similarly for the Druid, the aspect of the Rampaging Werebeast, the crit strike damage bonus is now going to be capped at 200%. And again,
Okay.
these numbers are still really high at 100 and 200% multiplicative bonus.
It's like
damage.
runaway
We're not really
conditions.
looking to just nerf these things to the ground or anything. We're just making sure that there's a cap on the
Yeah.
maximum amount.
I
you
think
can get.
all of these are really good as long as they coincide with buffs in other areas, just to kind of make that power distribution a little bit
But in the
more
future, when
even.
players, it lets us
In
add
a
things
vacuum,
like
these feel
increasing
bad, but I think these are
duration of
good
these,
so that
making
they
infinite
can
duration, or
more
doing other
comfortably
things like that
add
that we
more.
wouldn't be able to do if these were just uncapped forever.
Debuffs, right?
All right, so now let's get to specific classes.
Barbarian
and
Paragon boards
the
are
cool things
weak.
that are coming. So first thing that we've heard from Barbarian players is that their Paragon boards are just kind of weak, right? They're not particularly impactful or exciting.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to look here at one example, and we've changed quite a few of these. This is the Decimator Paragon node.
So from
Beforehand,
vulnerable
we
lucky
kinda
hit,
turned into a meme. It gave you a low chance to apply vulnerable
Yeah.
to enemies. With
Overpowering
using
vulnerability grants
specific
bonus
weapons and
damage.
the slashing weapons.
Overpowered
Now you can see in
Barbarian season
of Blood,
2.
Instead, it's still going to be themed a little bit around vulnerable. But now when you make enemies vulnerable, you just get a % damage bonus. And then when you overpower vulnerable enemies, you double that and you get a 20% multiple damage bonus. So it's much more powerful than it was before and is on par with other similar effects.
Right.
Next one now is Berserking. Berserking Barbarians are going to be eating pretty happy this patch.
Whoa.
The damage bonus used to be additive. So, when you went to the Berserking state and you got that, damage bonus, it was only
Damn.
damage bonuses, and now it's going to be multiplicative. So you're just being
So all of these things, I'm wondering now what they did with buckets, because all of these things sound like giving a multiplicative of damage bonus on Berserking's damage scaling plus the damage scaling on that Barbarian unique. Did they nerf the buckets really hard?
in general is going to be much more lucrative for you.
That's good.
And next, the of Ancestral Force legendary, everyone's favorite game mechanic in the game. Before it was that, when you use Hammer of the Ancients, it nuked out some damage and then a little explosion, and then that damage kind of had a separate value. So sometimes you'd be motivated to, turn around and attack and not hit the enemy directly because you want to hit him with the explosion and not your normal hit. Now it's just going to cause the quake to happen, but it just increases the damage of the base skill, and then the quake and the base skill
Cool.
just do one source of damage. So
A little
now you're not
more,
really getting any
little
more
less like
damage.
skill dependent.
Next one, let's talk about the sorcerer. So Incinerate is getting a pretty big buff here. The
Incinerate,
ramp up
channel
time
a ramp
is
time and cut in half.
play, you know,
Huge W.
Incinerate builds. Before it used to be that ramped up over 4 seconds. So you would
4 seconds, by the way, of standing still to get max damage in a game like this. I feel it makes me feel like no one played Incinerate in any kind of condition that was challenging. 4 seconds is an eternity.
channel your Incinerate on an enemy, and
An
the damage
eternity
will go up and go up
to
over 4
stand
seconds.
still.
And now we're cutting that in half to 2 seconds. The total damage that you're going to get is still the same. We're just making it much easier for you to get that maximum amount, and now you can reposition a lot more often. And next one, Enhanced Frozen Orb. We buffed this so that now it grants additional explosion damage against elites. This includes bosses as well. So
Okay,
normally, you know,
kind of nice, I
Frozen Orb
guess.
damage is kind of a big AoE damage, so a single target isn't that great. So in, you know, boss scenarios, it's not really as good. And now we've added a tuning knob here, so now we can make this, you know, much better or more comparable to other builds when it comes to
Yeah, they have great AoE and had some trouble with single
and
target,
then last
so
but
it's
not
nice.
least, we've got some feedback that the Winter and Electrocute Paragon glyphs didn't really have a place where they could be used on the Paragon board. So we've adjusted either the glyphs or the board itself, so now these can be slotted and actually give you a good bonus effect like the glyphs do.
Neat.
All right, let's talk about Rogue a little bit. Now, so unlike
Rogue was like the golden poster child, like the gold standard of where every class needed to be. Rogue was just good, and most of their kit worked, and everything had synergy, and most of their gear made sense. Like everyone that played a Rogue had a different experience in launch D4 than in every other class.
Barb and the Sork that we just talked about, we felt that Rogue was honestly in a pretty good place. We didn't have as many...
Other than the fact that some of their abilities were so widely usable that they appeared in every single build, right? Like dash or twisting blades or puncture. They just were so good. It didn't matter what they did. Their effects were so useful. So they just need to like clean that up. Topists?
To address on Rogue. There were still
yeah.
some things that we saw, but not quite as many as other classes.
Yeah.
The one area that we saw was with basic skills. Pretty much every Rogue build was running Puncture. Now, Puncture is a great skill. It does a whole lot of really cool things, but basically the other 4 basic skills were just
basic
not
skill
seeing
buffs.
really any use at all.
Blade shift, lucky hit chance up to 50%. Enhanced blade shift, 20% movement speed immediately. Heart seeker crit chance, 5% per stack. Cap is still the same. Forceful arrow, lucky hit chance increased.
Bringing those
Okay.
to the 50% chance to kind of keep them on par.
Blade shift and forceful arrow being a little more interesting.
Enhanced blade
Heart seeker
shift,
stacks
we upgrade
faster.
to Blade shift. Will now
Blade shift gives
immediately give you
more
full
movement speed.
bonus. Prior, you had to move through enemies, and it took a little bit of time to ramp up.
All
We're just
right.
going to give you that full move speed bonus right off the bat. And then Heartseeker, the critical strike chance that you get whenever Heartseeker hits a target, it previously stacked up at 3% per
These
attack.
feel good. They're not like major,
And that meant you needed
but they
to
feel
hit them
good.
5 times before you got the full 15% bonus. And 5 times is a lot. So now we're going to increase the gain per stack up to 5% per stack. So you can get that full bonus within 3 hits, which is very conveniently the same number that you need to max out your combo points. So Heartseeker might see a little bit more play in combo point builds going forward.
Cool.
Additionally, we also took a look at the Impetus passive. And this one, we just made it occur a little bit more often. You only need to move 12 instead of 15 meters. And
Whatever.
more importantly,
Cool.
it also increases the damage of your next non-basic attack.
Oh.
Next attack. And that meant that you would occasionally use a basic, and then you'd get the bonus on the basic.
Okay, that's good.
do a
That's
lot of
good.
Damage. Now you're definitely going.
It's kind of like the
full bonus on a higher damage.
the barb
skill
one where you
or
don't have to
skill
like play really
whenever you,
weirdly.
Get to trigger the Impetus passive.
Because you wouldn't want to do it on basic anyway. There's the other question, like,
Druid.
are they planning to do more around basic skills, where we could do basic builds?
Lead to the Rogue, the Druid's in a pretty good place, so not quite as many updates as other classes, but we still found some room to make Druid players happy.
Yeah.
First one is Ravens. Ravens is getting pretty good buffs across the board.
Uh-huh.
The passive damage is being increased by 20%. That's the Ravens that pick your enemies to death.
Woo.
The active damage is also getting increased by a whopping 55%. So that's the active
55%. This shows they've been buffing Ravens repeatedly for the last 4 months. This goes to show how bad they were on launch. that they can just keep buffing it over and over and over and over by very large, substantial numbers. The active was the only thing that did any meaningful damage, and they're increasing its damage by 55%.
Circle of ravens that hit enemies. And then enhanced ravens, the bonus critical strike chance
Crazy.
is going to be increased.
But now there's a new bat passive in the League of Blood, Season of Blood.
And then rabies. Rabies is also
it does what the Raven does exactly.
Off. And then we're also
damage 27%,
upgrades, which is natural
spread
rabies,
speed bonus made baseline. So it spreads faster.
Faster. We're giving half of that baseline. So now your rabies
cool.
is going to actually just spread between enemies 50% faster, so you don't have to wait as long for them to get infected. And then the natural rabies will increase that by another 50%.
Good.
Yeah,
rabies feels a lot better to play with now. It spreads out to the whole pack right away.
Yeah,
or a lot quicker.
A lot easier to use. Yep. And now Necromancer players. So Necromancer players will be pretty happy here. We got a lot of stuff coming for you. And again, this isn't even all
That's
of it.
defense is now baseline. Wait, that's the one that, yeah, your minions can't lose more than 30% of their max life from a single damage instance. This is now baseline. So all minions have this without you having to spend 3 talent points. This is good. Now take this and apply it to every minion in the entire game. Period. No, full stop.
So minions.
Every single minion needs this.
First thing is Death's Defense. This is
and they also still need damage reduction for AoE.
Was kind of mandatory for minion builds. This
wasn't
really
kinda, it was mandatory.
A boss or other big hit from enemies wouldn't just one-shot all of your minions.
Apply this to all minions and then give all minions a flat damage reduction to all AoE damage. The things that are going to stand in because they're dumb.
Also add in that this baseline functionality that your minions can't take more than 30% life, this applies to all player pets across the game, including druids, wolves. That's just
thumbs
how
up.
Our pets now work.
Good job.
And of course, we've redesigned the Death's Defense passive to give you another alternative if you want even more defense on your minions.
Yeah, good clarification. Druids eating even better today too.
Yes.
Next, Golem. Basic attack damage is getting doubled. We're insane. But yep, so it's going to get
more like the golems were trash before.
A lot stronger. Your blood golem,
good.
Your iron golem's active damage.
Bone golem's going to be insane.
Blood golem by 55%. The iron golem slam is going to be 15% better.
Good.
Also, many of your minion paragon node damage values have been increased. So that scaling minion damage into the late game is also going to be a lot better. Coldbringer's aspect. This one
allows any skeletal mages. Oh, so you can do like shadow mages cast Blizzard.
Skeletal mages could
That's
cast
cool.
Blizzard, you know, kind of.
Still is a base value, which I haven't seen anything that solves this problem of anything base value not scaling well enough.
Made sense thematically, cold mages, Blizzard,
but it's cool.
Things. But now we're opening this up to more builds. So now this aspect still makes your mages cast Blizzard, but now you can
shadow mages and bone mages can cast Blizzards now.
And next, so we had some affix reductions here. So before we had your...
I've been removed and replaced by a unified minion thorns affix.
Skeletal warriors, one for your skeletal mages, and another for your golem.
Thank God.
And now we're basically...
Do this across the whole game. So this just says that like on an item you could get skeletal warriors inherit % of your thorns. Skeletal mages inherit % of your thorns. Golem inherits % of your thorns. Now it's just minions inherit a % of your thorns. All minions. So like... yeah, I think they need to do this across the whole game. Take a lot of these split stats, like add more interesting stats instead of these filler stats that make you feel like there's a lot to earn, but there isn't. And even these individually weren't strong enough. By itself, minions inherit thorns isn't really all that great either.
So
but
now instead of having 3 separate affixes, we now have one unified. Your minions inherit thorns affix.
Cool.
And that can appear on ranged shields and gloves. So now you're gonna have a little bit less spam of affixes that you're not interested in if you're not looking for thorns in your build.
It's good.
And last but not least, shields.
Have armor.
Shields have
what
armor.
the frick?
So now when you're
that makes way too much sense.
It has armor because.
Hold on.
They protect you.
Hold on. Whoa. That makes too much sense.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about the damage bucket changes.
All right, this is. Brace yourself. This is the big one.
I refer to damage buckets, I'm mainly talking about critical strike damage, vulnerable damage, and overpower damage.
So for anyone who doesn't know what damage buckets means, damage buckets is basically a catch-all for stats that are clumped together, right? So if I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? so like, let's say like one is damage while berserking, damage while enemy is frozen, damage while enemy is chilled, damage while enemy is slowed. If certain stats are grouped together in the same cluster, they get added together first, and then that new total gets multiplied, so that if you have too many stats in the same bucket, the same grouping, it's less effective because they will be added first and then multiplied, which gives you a smaller overall result. So when you're doing damage buckets, you're incentivized to have as much split as you can, right? You want good like numbers in all of the buckets, because what you care about is the multiplicative aspect in between them. You don't want too many things being added together first, because that shrinks your total value overall. And the big problem was there was a bucket before that was just crit, and then there's another bucket that's vuln, right? And then you have like every damage source in the entire game in one bucket. So all of these sources here in this bucket were added all together and then multiplied, but crit was always multiplied and vulnerable was always multiplied. So no matter what, these two stats became far more valuable than any other stat in the entire game because they always multiplied. So the question is, how did they fix it?
As well. So in Season of the Malignant, vulnerable and critical strike damage were different buckets, and mixing these two, so if you critical struck a vulnerable enemy, would kind of multiply all of your critical strike damage by all of your vulnerable damage, and you just get more than the sum of your parts, like dramatically more. And
multiplicatively more.
The optimal way for basically every single build in the game to play was to stack critical strike damage, was to stack vulnerable damage, and then just
that was it.
Vulnerable, and then crit them. That's how you did most damage in the Season of Malignant, no matter what your build, no matter what your class.
Yes.
And
correct.
so that meant that, say, if an item dropped that had plus crit chance, plus crit damage, and plus vulnerable damage, that was best in slot for literally everyone.
Yep.
And that was unhealthy. It was leading to a lot of stagnation, a lot of builds that could not fully utilize critical strike or vulnerable, say builds like dot builds, because dots can't crit.
Accurate.
They couldn't really capitalize
or overpower
the same way, and they got left behind builds that could. So
overpower can't crit.
Yeah, so moving forward into the Season of Blood, critical strike damage, vulnerable, and overpower as well are going to be different buckets, but mixing them will only give multiplicative damage bonuses capped at a certain amount. So if an enemy is vulnerable, you're going to deal 20% more damage to them. And it doesn't matter how much additional plus vulnerable damage you get, it's not going to increase the 20% multiplicative amount. Same with critical strike, it'll give you 50% multiplicative damage. And then overpower as well. If you overpower an enemy, similar to crit, it'll give you up to 50% bonus damage based on your health total. Overpower calculations are we're not going to get into all the details of exactly how overpower is calculated.
Why not?
In the blood here, but
get into it.
Check out the patch notes for a more explicit detail there. But basically, know that it has a multiplicative aspect up to 50%, just like crit.
Okay, so what they're saying here is, it is still going to be required for builds that can crit to have vulnerable and crit damage, because they still are going to be crazy multipliers. They're just saying, just like resistances, there's going to be a hard cap. So you just want to be able to hit that cap and then focus on other things. So what that means is that going into Season 2, if this was the amount of damage you dealt normally in Season 1, this is going to be the amount of damage you deal in Season 2. All of your damage is going to go way down. And to be fair, that means that like each part that's making up this bar becomes more valuable, right? Whereas before you had like these pieces here, and then like this was vulnerable. Now that this is vulnerable, your other parts matter comparatively more, but your damage is going to go way down. So the other question is, are they going to rebalance boss fights and, tier 100 nightmare dungeons and things like that to counteract this fact? But the fact that this is capped means that, so if you cap crit damage, by the way, 50% is the floor. Every character, you make a character level 1 that's naked, it'll have 50% crit damage. So I don't know what this means because that's just odd. But like if I get 100% more crit damage from gear, they're just saying that like there's going to be a cap for how much each of these can scale. And then they just kind of dropped on us that overpower is calculated differently now. And trust us, it's better. Trust me, bro. Which I don't know. I don't know what that means.
Crit and vulnerable.
And it'll scale and just be better. Trust us. It'll be good.
Overpower
Trust me,
was
bro.
definitely
It's
not
better.
overpowered in Season of the Malignant. It was
You're
rather
gonna
on the
love my
weekend.
nuts.
And here going into Season
Trust
of Blood,
me,
it's
bro.
going to be much more powerful. I really expect Blood Necros and
Come
Barbarian
on,
Druids
man.
to be doing very well in this season. So let's go over an
Well, at
actual
least
example here
Overpower
from
has
Earth
its
just
own
to
bucket
clarify what I
now.
mean. So
I don't think it
if you
did
have
before.
150% critical strike damage.
Yes.
That includes, that's what it shows on your character sheet, right? That's, that's how much critical strike damage you have. It also factors
Trust
in
me,
as
bro.
50% bonus damage that you deal anytime you crit.
Okay.
And similarly, if you have 200% vulnerable damage, it also factors in that 20% vulnerable damage that is just baseline to vulnerable application.
Okay.
Previously, we would take the entire 150% and multiply it by 200%, and that would be your damage output. It would scale really high.
Yeah.
But now we're going to take whatever damage you would deal, and we're going to multiply it by 1.5 because it's a crit, and then we're going to take that result and multiply it by 1.2 because the enemy is vulnerable. And that's why the 50% and the 20% combine to 80. It doesn't combine to 70 because you're multiplying them together. Like I said, so you still get some synergy where it's greater than the sum of its parts, but no longer is it the full 150 and the full 200. We're just always going to take the 50.
Okay, so here's what they did, which is kind of boring, but effective. This should work. It's boring, but it should work. So all they're saying is that little graph that I gave you before, where you have the bucket times the bucket times the bucket. All they're saying is that they are giving you a flat multiplier, right? So the vuln bucket is 1.2, right? And the crit bucket is 1.5. And then you have whatever your overpower bucket is. Who knows what their math is going to be. So you have like basically the royalty of multipliers at the top, and those are fixed values. Then you have the peasants of the additives down below, the people that eat the dirt. And those are all going to add together. So they're basically the way things worked before for normal stats, like damage to slowed or damage to wall werewolf or whatever, it would add all those values together, and then it would treat that new sum and then multiply it towards the target. And that's why it was always worse to do non-crit, non-vulnerable damage, because it would be added together and not multiply. So all they did was they took out the stuff that you add to your gear for vulnerable and crit. So when you get crit damage on your gear or you get vulnerable damage on your gear, that's now going to be additive. So they just took out all of the earnable vulnerable and the earnable critical strike damage, and they made all of it additive. So it then treats vulnerable and crit just like every other stat in the entire game, which means there isn't really, like, buckets don't really matter as much anymore. If the target is vulnerable, it will take 20% more damage. If you crit, you will do 50% more damage on a scalar, 50% more. But you can increase the flat value that gets scaled, the additive value, by getting gear increase. But now getting vulnerable damage, like I'm not going to do this math like off the cuff, but getting vulnerable damage is going to be more or less very equivalent to getting damage with lightning, like lightning damage. So like lightning damage, the 20% lightning damage should be very equivalent to 20% vulnerable damage, because lightning damage previously was treated as additive. Now vulnerable damage that you get from gear is going to be treated as additive, and then it's going to get a multiplier on top of it at the higher level. But yeah, so it's kind of a boring solution, to be honest, but it should be effective in solving the problem. What's up, D-Man?
And the 20. And so that should give us a bit more...
There's still a big question around overpower.
Consistent across crit and vulnerable.
What does trust us, bro? It's good, man, bro. What does that mean?
Has to stack critical strike damage and has to stack vulnerable. it'll still be valuable to do it for builds that are interested in that.
Mind can't
but it's not
math.
going to be the best in slot for
Basically,
every time.
every stat you get on your gear now is going to be additive. And there's going to be a minimum requirement. Like you need a minimum amount of resistances, a minimum amount of vulnerable, a minimum amount of crit if you can crit. But everything else is going to be treated equally rather than vulnerable and crit strike being treated as like these, you know, premium citizens.
Still motivate you, and you should be glad to be mixing multiplicative buckets.
It's boring, but it's good. It works. It's
just
good.
Your opportunity cost isn't insane if you don't. So now you can do other things.
Yeah, so the overall impact that players are going to feel in
This is I warned you, chat. I warned you. All of your damage is going to go way down in season 2 because of this change.
Season of Blood with this is that
way
the
down.
nominal damage numbers that you're doing are going to go down slightly.
Not slightly.
And that's because we just don't have this massive multiplicative bonus.
No.
But we're not here
slightly
trying to make the player weaker against monsters. What we actually did was we went through and looked at all the monsters in the game and retuned them.
That's not slightly.
Sure that players who are, optimizing their build and have strong builds are still approximately as equal against monsters as they were before.
No.
Mixing damage types, as we said, was going to be less required. It's still powerful to do, but it's not going to be the end-all, be-all of the only way you can build a character.
Trust me, bro.
And of course, building individual damage types are going to be more equal in value, mainly, like I said, about overpower. Overpower builds are just falling behind. Same with things like dot damage builds or minion-focused builds. Those are going to...
This is the most important change right here. This is what we need to care about the most. Basically, all scaling stats that you can earn through Paragon or through your gear are more or less equal in weighted value, more or less depending on what your build is, right? Like obviously, if you're running a dot build, crit is not going to be equal to, vulnerable or whatever because you don't crit with dots. Like just in general, they're all kind of calculated in a similar way, which means that getting more of one isn't going to be significantly better than getting more of a different one in that. This is a huge troll. This is not nominal. This is not slightly. Your damage overall is going to go way down.
Come up and be much more comparable to builds like
unless they're doing another sweeping change that they haven't mentioned yet.
And so on.
Yeah, so we have a little visual here, but imagine this is like the current season where crit and vuln builds are just really high up there. They're doing a ton of damage. They're wiping everything. And then all the other builds are kind of pretty far behind, right? If you're not mixing these two things, then you're just less effective. In season 2, what we're doing is we're bringing them together, and then what we're going to do after that is balance monster power around
Animations!
So, again, our goal is not to make you weak.
Okay, so that's the thing that they didn't mention. Balance monster power to be based on this, right? This is just like a corporate break room animation to make you feel good. But yeah, this was the thing that they hadn't mentioned that makes this a little bit more believable, is that if they are going to overall nerf monster power to bring it in line with the huge nerf that every person's going to get with this change, then I believe that they could aim for something similar.
World that we live in the season of Blood.
Yeah, it's not about bringing crit and vuln down. It's about making sure other builds can reach that same level of power that crit and vuln builds experienced in Season of Malignity.
Well, you're bringing crit and vuln down, and then you're bringing the monsters down. So
it'll just open up the space.
You're doing exactly that
type of power level with a variety of skills and affixes, and not just crit.
Not about bringing crit and vuln down. That's exactly what you did.
So let's talk a little bit about the overall goals for the damage bucket changes.
Okay.
First and foremost, we really want players to be rewarded for investing into their primary vector of damage. So for example, if you're a blood necromancer who really likes to overpower enemies, you're going to be rewarded for investing in plus overpower damage.
These changes are in line with
other
this.
tanky stats that scale it, like health and
this
fortify generation. And then once you invest in that as like the main bulk of your power,
depending on what the new overpower calculation is,
increasing that,
trust me, bro.
Maybe you do find a way to apply vulnerable, but it's not going to be the main focus of your build. You can also get a lot of skill ranks to increase whatever your core skill rank is. Those still increase your core skill damage multiplicatively with skill ranks, which goes back to what Adam had said earlier about how powerful skill ranks are going to be going forward into Season of Blood. Also, we don't want this to just make the game simpler. We know that right now players they feel like, they're getting crit and vulnerable on their gear, and that's great. That adds an interesting layer of the item chase. Like, hey, you found the best in slot item. And with this change, it's not going to be that exact same, but our intention is not to make the itemization game simpler or more boring, because we're actually making
We don't want to bring down damage, so we brought down damage.
Other ways of scaling your character in interesting ways.
It might have just been a misspeak. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just funny.
So last but not least, we're going to talk about making it a bonus, and I'm going to kind of expose a gap in our armor here. What we were really afraid of when we were looking at doing these changes is that in a vacuum, if we did this and nothing else, we think that it could be a negative experience to the game, what Charles alluded to. What I'm terrified of is that we do these changes and the reaction basically is, wait, you're lowering my damage and you're making it less rewarding to try and build crit and vuln. This is awful. I hate it, right? This isn't our goal, and we knew that we had to combine this with some other.
Right, so like that's the thing, right? Is they're shifting, like they're dramatically lowering the damage output of every build and every player in the game, and then saying, "Hey, trust me, bro. We tuned the monsters to be appropriate with the new player power level." Did they do that accurately? We don't know. We just don't know. We'll find out on the 17th, I guess.
There's systemic updates to the game to make sure that this new world of
human error says they probably missed that mark.
Was something that's interesting
initially
and kind of has some meat to it as a player. And also what we mentioned before.
And when they say tuning monsters, are they talking about not only the amount of HP that they have, but also the amount of damage that they deal, right? Do we still need damage reduction, like all 4 defensive stats on our chest, 4 defensive stats on our legs, 4 defensive stats on our amulets, defensive stats on our boots, defensive stats on our helm, all of the defensive legendaries in the entire game? You know, like, do we still need that? Because damage, like, we're going to get one shot by corpse bows or not? Like, what does tuning monsters, air quotes, mean? Trust me, bro.
Is that we are, again, going to be tuning monsters
what does that mean?
More appropriate with the new player power level. Our goal here is that your player power difference should be minimal. If anything, you'll probably feel more powerful compared to before, just because of all the unique upgrades and other, you know, class updates and changes that we're making to the game. So you shouldn't really have a huge difference in how you feel going through mobs and dungeons and things. Just you're having more options of how you do it. So
trust me, bro.
A big part of our updates. We're adding effects to kind of give that scaling back, but instead of having it be baseline, we're going to do it through player interaction. So if you remember before, that little graphic of, like, you know, the crit and vuln was really high and the other player power was down below. How are we bringing these things together? Well, we're going to bring that player power up for the other builds through these kind of designs and effects. So the goals with these changes before we get into them are twofold. The first is we want to add some multiplicative power back to the player, but in a more interesting way.
Right.
Because as we mentioned before, we are removing multiplicative power by capping it with crit and vuln.
Yes.
So we want it now, like the upside of that is that we can actually give it back, but we can do it now in choices that you make as a player rather than it just being an underhood thing about how the game works. And then we also want to try and make the itemization experience better, particularly in the latter portions of the game. We want the stats you chase on.
I feel like it's just like a lot of, it feels like corporate-y stuff. We want this to be better. We want, this is going to be good. This is going to feel good. This will be better. This will be scaled right. All of these are good. Like, they have a mixture of like really detail-oriented, like substance-filled changes that we can tell, like, yes, those will be better. That is a good change versus like, yeah, it's, you know, like, I want to be taller. I want 6-pack abs. I want to run real fast, and I'm going to do it. How are you going to do it? Trust me, man. I will.
On your items, kind of be more tailored.
I'm going to be so fast.
More interesting.
I'm going to be the fastest runner in humankind
but this is just one
ever.
Way that we think we can try and make your stats and your gear and
what's up, Stutters? The changes look good. The changes look good.
Let's go through an example. So this is
After the dot builds.
Effects are what we added kind of all over the place on all the classes. Ways to
5% reduced cooldown mana cost per conjuration skill.
Here is the old elemental.
Reduced cooldown mana cost flat. And they deal bonus damage.
Note
Nice.
on the sorcerer. And before it basically
very
said,
cool.
You know, we want you to put all the conjuration skills on your bar. And when you do, they have reduced cooldown and mana cost per skill you have. This is your
My mom wants to play Diablo 5.
And your lightning spear, right? We have one for each element. Now you're still going to get that. You can see on the right, this is the Season of Blood's design. So they still get reduced cooldown and mana cost, but now we've given you a goal to chase and a way to multiplicatively scale their damage. So the way it
bonus
works
damage
here
with
is
elemental damage.
Those conjuration skills
cool.
are all going to deal multiplicative damage based on the total amount of your bonus damage stat with fire, lightning, and cold. So here you can see, and I think these numbers actually match to what the current bonus is. So what we want you to do here is you go to your character sheet and you're like, okay, I want to get bonus damage to fire, lightning, and cold. These, you know, are like your plus fire damage on your gear or whatever, right? Normally these stats aren't very attractive.
Physical and element.
But now they're going to be a lot more attractive.
Physical
because
damage is a stat you can get. Not an element, though.
Additive stats will now turn into multiplicative stats if you take this node and you go for this specific build.
This is a good change.
And the other really neat thing about this is that it makes your Paragon board or Paragon nodes, and even we can make items or other effects more interesting where we say, hey, you know, you get bonus non-physical damage. That will actually triple dip with this Paragon node.
True.
Legendary power.
Very cool.
It will increase your damage with fire, lightning, and cold, and so it actually will triple the amount that this one node would give you in value for this one legendary power.
Yeah, Stark builds feel good.
And we've added these effects kind of all over the place. You're going to see a lot more scaling.
Damage with ultimate bonus and grant this bonus to all skills for 8 seconds when cast. Cool.
Depending on what you get. Here's another one. This is one for the Rogue. This is
cool
a
beans.
sign that we're doing for no witnesses. So what this does is, this one makes you care about your damage with ultimate stat. So this was a stat that could appear on your gear. It usually wasn't very good. No one really tried to chase it. But this says that now your ultimate skills on your
fight
rogue
fire with fire, more
more damage based on that stat. And when you cast your ultimate, that multiplicative
it's physical
damage
or
will apply to
non-physical.
all
All
of your
magic
skills
is
for 8 seconds. So this
can
kind
be
of
buffed
enables
in
a
one stat
complete
with
new build
non-physical.
With a rogue, where you want to spam, you know, rain of arrows or whatever ultimate you can as often as you can, because even just using the ultimate is going to give you a multiplicative bonus, and that bonus on all of your skills will be based on this damage with ultimate stat that you can get via gear and Paragon and other places.
Yeah, I think Rogue is my favorite class to play that new flicker step unique on, where when you're evading through enemies, you get a lot of ultimate cooldown reduction. It lets you trigger no witnesses more often. You want to build a lot of ultimate, and you can play it, you know, with Rain of Arrows or Shadow Clone or Death Trap. Any of them, it feels really good and a much more cohesive package that lets you scale to a really strong late game build and is not just based around crit and vuln. It's now based around ultimate skill damage.
Whoa.
Yeah, and to be clear here, this will be on all the classes got some amount of this, and it's not only on the Paragon board. Some of it, your key passives will be doing it. Some uniques will be doing this. There's kind of a bunch of places. And I believe last but not least, so if you remember last time we were on stream and I talked, I brought up how we had a stated goal of trying to scale effects that don't really scale very well. These are generally effects where there's a legendary power that spawns a thing, like let's say Earthquakes with the Barbarian or Dust Devils on the Barbarian, things like that. And those effects didn't really scale very well, and we wanted to add things that do. So in the Season of Blood, we've added some things. This isn't going to be everything we do forever. This is just the beginning, but we've got 2 new Paragon glyphs per class, where we're going to be adding these scaling effects, and now you can create builds, hopefully, that you weren't really able to before.
Barbarian.
Scale them.
Strength and range increases your earthquakes.
Kind of design in the future. I think it's
damage to bosses and crouchable enemies for each active earthquake.
So here's going to be some examples. So the first one is Rumble. This is a new Barbarian.
2 new glyphs should be interesting.
Going to let your earthquakes scale multiplicatively with all the strength that you get in an area around the glyph when you slot it.
That is
and
interesting.
You also deal more damage based on each active earthquake that you have. So you want to get a lot of active earthquakes, and it makes you more powerful.
Just to clarify, I think when you building strength around this will give additive damage to your earthquakes. Most glyphs on the top section is all additive damage.
Oh yeah, good clarification.
But then the second half, the additional bonus gives you a multiplicative bonus based on how many earthquakes you're creating. So it's still great for earthquake builds because it increases all of your damage that way.
Yeah. Next is the Stalagmite. This is for the Sorcerer. So we're giving you a way to scale your ice spikes per intelligence purchase within range, and then also your ice spikes are going to have a higher crit chance. And then we've got Explosive. This one is for the Rogue, and this one lets you scale your stun grenade damage with Dexterity. And then also you're going to get damage reduction whenever you drop a stun grenade.
All right. I know we've gone through a ton of slides here.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of slides, a lot of stuff to actually cover regarding class changes, of course, all the damage bucket changes and everything. One thing to note is I know we only highlighted a few specific things on classes. As we've mentioned, patch notes are actually going to be coming after the stream. So you'll be able to read through every single class change, all the different changes that we've even talked about last week on the stream, and other items, including bug fixes and everything.
Yeah, there's a lot of this.
It's a pretty lengthy patch notes. It's by far
I still think they need to stop doing this. I actually really like Adam. I think he's really good. at his job, and I think he's really smart. Oh. But the whole like, this is big, this is huge, you're gonna love it, you're gonna love my nuts. I feel like they need to stop doing that in general. I just don't think it's a good practice of like, this has 42 pages and this is really huge and this is the biggest patch ever and this one's really chonky and this one's really insane and this one's really cool and you're really gonna love it. I feel like they just need to be like, here's the patch, here's what you need, here's what you can think whatever you want about it.
Up all our patch notes beforehand, this one ends up like being like half of like,
right, because if you say it's like 42 pages,
it's pretty
and it's 42 pages of stuff they don't like,
so, patch notes
or
will
things
end up
that
going
don't
live
feel
here
good,
after the stream, so you can check
you
it
know?
out on Diablo4.com.
Just doesn't, I don't know.
We do want to talk about some of our future changes that are also going to be coming post season 2. For instance, patch 121. We haven't even hit patch 120. Patch 120.
Wog! Do the wog. Do the wog.
At the start of season 2, but patch 121.
Yeah,
Is
exactly.
going to be coming out.
I don't
After
qualify
season 2,
things like
before
that.
BlizzCon. But
Let
we
people
did wanna
decide if
actually
they
cover
like it or
what would
not.
be in patch 121, and we also wanted to talk about how future content pieces, like within season 2, we're going to be constantly updating and adding new features to the game within season 2, and players will hear more
Release
about
the
that
notes
at like BlizzCon and future streams. But one big thing that we are adding,
It's basically a lost art.
Is a training dummy, kind of a
huge.
target dummy where you can actually practice builds, test out different
That's huge.
You know, items and everything like that.
One of the best changes.
This will be located in Kiovushad in a cellar, and you can actually customize it and change it from like a normal training dummy to, you know, adding additional ones or boss.
That's very, very cool.
And you'll actually be able to test out different builds. So this
the
will
Lost
be
Ark.
coming in 121. Just a reminder.
What do they call it?
Continuously say that so people don't go like
Trinidad or whatever it's called.
On October 17th, 121.
Yes.
But this will be towards the end of this month. We'll have more information as that actually hits. And then the other
end of
feature that we're
October.
gonna be adding, and this one's a big one that I know people have been asking for. In 121,
Every RPG that has wide build variety needs a target dummy. I'll say it.
there will be a option for you to be able to reset your Paragon board. Which we know that everyone has been asking for, and it's something that we've been wanting to put in. And so,
Easier respecs.
yeah, easier respecs is going to be way better for players. And so, in 121, that feature will actually be coming. And again, like I said, towards the end of this month, we'll have that. We'll talk more about that. There'll be patch notes associated with that update, and of course, we'll have more updates to season 2 that we'll be talking about at BlizzCon. So. You should make sure to check out BlizzCon if you're going, or if you want to go, you can still grab a ticket. And of course, we also
Premium Battle Pass.
The, BlizzCon collection.
No heckin' way,
which has a
bro.
bunch of Diablo 4 stuff along with some World of Warcraft, Hearthstone, Overwatch items in there. But with the Diablo 4 items, it does include a like the Legendary Collection actually includes a token.
Mounts are cool, I guess.
Battle Pass,
or horses.
The Premium Battle Pass. We've been getting a lot of questions about this. The Premium Battle Pass token in that can be used for season 2 if you want, or it can be used for any future season. So you can use that.
Did they add a confirm button this time?
And that is included in this, and it also has some really cool
oh my god.
So, but that is available on the
cool.
Battle.net shop now for, and that is the BlizzCon collection.
Cool.
We have some Q&A that we do want to go over today. I know that players, if you have questions, feel free to jump into Twitch chat and ask your questions. I will butcher your names, guaranteed.
I feel like Q&A is Q&A usually hasn't been useful.
But we will we'll be.
It's like, can we have this? And like, it's on our radar. We're thinking about it. We're talking about it.
Underperforming skills, because
we like that idea.
You know, we've heard a little bit.
Gold
about it
star
today,
for
but
you.
It's something that we've been hearing for the last, couple months of like, hey, some of these builds just don't feel viable. It feels like I'm going under one build. Like, what are you guys planning on doing that?
Totally. Well, first we plan to redo all the underlying math of the game and change how all the builds work and change all the So skills specifically. Yeah, there are definitely skills that are underperforming that
we'll keep
don't have
buffing
as
and
wide
adjusting.
Want. I would say we're going to try and look at them at an individual basis on a skill by skill. There are definitely ones that we've identified as a team that we're already going to start taking a look at. We learn a lot when we launch the game to millions of people, right? Of course, we have ideas that sometimes pan out.
Well, I mean, he is
don't.
pulling them
And when
live.
they don't,
They've
we have to
proven
kind of
that.
reevaluate. Well, what was the purpose of it?
But
Did it
obviously, he's
still
probably
keep the heart
gonna
and the
pick
spirit of the
ones
skill,
that
without
still
changing
soft
it completely?
serving.
Or sometimes we do need to change it
Right.
to make it like fit and actually.
He's not gonna be like,
that isn't. That
so,
doesn't fit any
Andrew,
skill.
tell us
So it kind of depends what our answer is on a
why
skill basis.
D4 bad.
But it is definitely a goal of ours that we don't want a skill to just
Right.
languish forever and just not really have a use case or be useful. To clarify though, I do think it's okay that a skill is a little more niche and maybe isn't like, we're not saying every skill needs to be used equally by every player.
No.
I don't think that's a reasonable expectation. I don't know if it's very healthy, right? I think there's something attractive about feeling smart that you're able to find this niche use case or you're playing in a unique way that not many other people do. But if a skill isn't fulfilling even any purpose or the purpose it was intended for, then I think that's grounds to reevaluate and try and find something that works better for it.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a few different ways that a skill can kind of fall short, right? It's not just always a matter of numbers, right? It's not just, oh, just crank up the damage on it. You know, if the damage is crazy, of course it'll be usable. But that's not the right answer all the time. Sometimes, you know,
It's not?
We talked about puncture earlier today on the rogue. And if you look at just pure damage, puncture compared to the other basics on rogue, about comparable. Like it wasn't an outlier in one way or another, but we saw so many players playing puncture because of its interaction with other systems, right? We had it, hey, puncture is a really easy way of applying vulnerable, and in Season of Malignant, vulnerable was really valuable. So we're not only tackling this on making the other options more usable and interact in an easier to use way, but also you know, adjusting the systemic issue like, hey, vulnerable's too mandatory, so you have
Shirtless
to take
character
the thing that
win?
applies vulnerable.
Shirtless David?
And now that that's less of a hard requirement, we're hoping that that brings these other basics to the fore. And we're going to take a similar approach when we look at other underperforming skills as well.
I think that's actually a really good point, is that, you know, we talked a lot about base systems of the game in the Season of Blood, and a reason why we're really looking at all these base systems and changing them pretty significantly.
Shirtless Felix win.
Foundation,
Bro, I
so
want
we can identify these outlying skills or effects.
Shirtless
Now we can
Dredge.
fix them in a way that's more healthy for the overall game, because when the overall systems are healthy, then we can go back and look at the outliers and fix them in a good way. You know, like we could have fixed puncture.
Shirtless
by taking away
clown.
the vulnerable application, right? But really, the problem is vulnerable, not puncture necessarily. So.
All right, we have a question here from Zigzag. Are channeling skills still not allowed to overpower
Zigzag?
this patch, considering the scaling changes?
This is true, yes. It's just part of the way.
Was that
Diablo
you,
4
Zig?
works, is that channeling skills do not overpower. That's partially because it would just, if you overpower is determined on a skill cap.
Except
basis.
Blood
So when
Mist.
you
Blood
cast
Mist
a
does
skill,
overpower.
The game determines, hey, did you overpower or did you not? And if you overpower with a channel skill, then you know channel skills can in theory go on forever. And that would just be a situation we don't want to live in, where you're just fishing for procs basically of overpower, and then as soon as you get it, you let it go forever. That's not really the kind of gameplay we want to encourage in Diablo 4. And so it's true that yes, channeled skills do not overpower. But we're still looking, when we're looking to balance channeled skills, such as Incinerate, we know that going in.
Yeah, they should be balanced and tuned around the fact that they can't overpower. And actually, to allude to that, because that's a good segue, if you remember back, I talked about the Barbarian and the Druid, how we're capping that unlimited cap of power that you can get. That's kind of also why overpower doesn't work on channeled skills, is that if we made it work, we would have to tune and balance all of overpower around the potential infinite duration that a channeled skill has. And that means that now overpower only gets used for channeled skills, because that's the only place that it's going to be good, and then everything else doesn't feel as good because of it. That's why we're adding these caps and things to some places, is that it's not really because we don't like people to get a lot of power, it's that everything else must become weak for one thing to be even reasonable, let alone strong, if we allow infinite scaling of things.
Yes.
And that makes, you know,
that
while
is
one
true.
thing might be really cool,
Yep.
it makes the overall game much less fun or interesting.
Yep.
I'm going to spitfire a few questions. I'm just going to answer really quickly, just so I can, like, a lot of questions here.
Yeah, totally.
Are there plans on like yearly roadmaps and roadmaps for the game? BlizzCon, stay tuned.
BlizzCon.
In regards to, we're getting a lot of questions about social features and like group finders and clan features and everything. Those are things that we're looking at, and
November
most
3rd.
definitely have been taking in a lot of feedback.
Killer Queen,
Nothing
you can
to
follow.
announce today, but it is something that I know the team is very much reading and seeing. Does this mean that Tempest Roar only drops from Duriel, or can it drop from other rare mobs? No, it can drop from other rare mobs. Duriel just happens to have we were showcasing the
on his loot table.
Drop tables for unique for these bosses
Good.
here. So you'll know, like, hey, if I want to get a Tempest Roar on a Druid or something, I can actually farm Duriel and have a better chance of knowing that.
I wanted to clarify. You can still get them in the other parts of the game. When you finish Nightmare Dungeon,
Yeah.
and go through it, they can still drop off of mobs, be it end of Nightmare Dungeon reward. You still get them out of Hell Tide, all those things. Just doing this, you have a higher chance to get these specific things.
Let's see. We have a question from Sock and Boppers.
Sock and
will we be
Boppers?
seeing more support or basic focus builds this time around? I don't know
Like
what that
basic
means.
skills?
I guess so.
Yeah, basic builds.
Yeah,
basic skill builds. Yeah.
Yeah, there's not as much support for like building your entire build around dealing damage with basic skills. That's not something that we have a ton of support in the game for right now or in season
At
1.
all,
But it's
period.
definitely something on our radar. Is like, hey, this is
There's
a
like
cool
none.
idea of making your basic skill
Yeah.
kind of flipping it on its head, right? Basic skills right now are a bit more of a setup, a bit more of a generator.
Let me
type of
Earth
skill.
Spike, bro.
That's definitely a design space that we are looking
Trust
into.
me, bro.
And we'll be making designs for in the future. Don't have any specifics to share yet, obviously, but it's certainly on our radar to enable those going forward.
Yeah, we know it and we think it's cool too.
Yep.
The question was asking about support builds. Well,
More designer-specific questions.
not getting that answer.
From Lucky Luciano, I know that person. How are the Necromancer and Sorceress classes being balanced to account for the changes to resistances which intelligence characters inherently benefit from?
Sure. I can
Good
take this
question.
one. So, one thing to keep in mind is when you're making a fantasy ARPG or a fantasy-based games, we do actively want there to be some differences between the classes where some are better or worse at some things than others, right? We want them to have boons for picking your class so that they're, you feel different than all the other ones, right? If everyone was just like a blank class, that would be a very different game than what we made for Diablo. So that was partially why when we talked about resistances, we talked a lot about how our goals are that everyone can kind of comfortably get there, because what we didn't want was if resistances really matter and you can't get to cap, or you can only get to cap at like level 100 with maxed out gear, and even then you may not be able to, and you have to like do this really complicated puzzle, then those classes would have a really large advantage over the other ones in the elemental resistance realm, right? And a lot of our bosses and things do that type of damage, so it would actually be a really big balancing issue. Because of that, we made it that it's a very achievable goal. This goal might be a little bit easier.
At time, your DoorDash is here.
Or whoever, they have the in scale.
That was weird.
Resistances or whatever stat may have you. And we also even purposely make effects like passive nodes or Paragon nodes or other designs that are class specific. Different classes can get to different breakpoints easier than other ones. And
he's just listing all the ways that they can solve it if it's a problem.
Perfect balance world, and we have like
not that
this is the world we actually live in.
He's saying don't worry about it. We can fix it if it sucks.
The Necros or Druids to be better at.
He's not really saying that it's not going to be a problem. He's just saying that if it is a problem,
more interesting and compelling
we can solve it.
Where your class experience when you're playing through the game feels different, right? Like if you play a sorcerer for the first time and when you've played a barbarian your whole life, you're like, oh wow, it's really nice that it's easier for me to fix this resistance game than when I'm playing on my barb. Or hey, when I'm playing on a barb compared to a sword, it's really nice. I have all these unstoppable skills that move me around everywhere.
Bob the Builder.
We want there to be kind of differences in pros and cons to things. So
ding dong.
Really, when we need to make a change,
Who is it? KGB.
Out of that realm, that's kind of reasonable, right? If something's too far down, even where it's too painful to play a class for some reason, right? Like we've heard some feedback from Necromancer players where we don't give them a ton of mobility and they're, kind of sad, hey, we don't have enough and we need to get brought up here. Well, we're okay with being a little lower. We just, what we're at is not acceptable. And then same thing on the high end, right? Where maybe it's too easy to get things, then we need to bring it in. So, yeah, the answer is we made resistances this way, knowing this in mind, so that, barbarians, it's still going to be very easy for you to get to this cap just by playing the game and doing a little bit of planning. So we don't expect there to be a huge power discrepancy, especially since everyone's going to get to that cap eventually anyways.
Oh, they put out the article too.
We have a question from Psychophant. which is a good question. It's for Barbarian specifically.
Sure.
What are your plans to address Barbarian resource generation and uncoupling it from shouts?
Yeah, in the
Hmm.
Seasons of Blood, or in the
Bing
Seasons
bong,
of
F your
Blood,
life.
we haven't completely answered the shout issue, which we're aware of. Like, players want to put on all the shouts and then shout all the time, and just yell at enemies a lot.
Yeah, are they gonna adjust that or not?
We're still looking at what we want our solution to be. And we're also looking at a similar thing with sorcerers with equipping defensive skills, where they want to take Frost Nova and Flame
Yeah, they have to
Shield
take 3 of them.
and do all of them. It's a deeper issue to solve.
No, they put an article and the patch notes. It's like an article going over all the details.
Still okay picking some, just not picking all of them.
And then there's
We don't have anything
patch
to announce
notes.
yet, but it is something that
Patch notes are very long.
But it's
Do we want to go through all the patch notes?
I'll just be transparent about how, at least for shouts, we're thinking is one of the issues that made it hard was that
Do we care?
we designed a lot of our passives and our legendary effects and other things that said when you shout, gain X.
Just the good necro
right
ones.
away, that becomes triple more powerful when you make
Right.
3 shouts instead of 1. And we didn't balance it that way, where we expected everyone to just always take the 3 things. Same with defensive skills or anything else that's synergistic like that. On the one hand, we like these kinds of designs, like, hey, your core skills.
They're crazy long, dude.
Other things, of a category do more.
Crazy
Make you
long.
Think about mixing the category, but when we go too far, and we definitely, I think, did with
A lot of
shouts as an
fixes, too.
example, then it just says, hey, do all
Cool.
of them or don't do any of them. And the answer right now is really do all of them because they're all really strong independently. So we may need to decouple them, which is like, hey, instead of all your shouts get increased duration, or you always.
This is why I don't like the Q&As. It's all like
when specific shouts are, but then that doesn't
like
feel good. It's kind of limiting because we're kind of telling you what.
discussion time,
have to try
right?
well,
It's not answering a question. It's like,
difficult.
hey, yeah, we can do that. We'll talk about it.
Here regarding glyphs from Max78. Sorry, I don't want to butcher the name. Any plans on making more glyphs or bonuses spell agnostic?
Yeah, the TL trailer was that,
Yes, so
hey, we don't like the
we're
fact that you can
making more
triple
content
shout
going
and get
forward in,
infinite rage
future seasons.
or
We're
fury.
gonna be making a lot more glyphs.
We just don't know what we're going to do about it.
That is definitely design space, is to work on categories of skills or either other unique effects. It's not.
Can we
always
get
gonna
more
be-
glyphs? Yeah,
and
we'll do
honestly,
more
we
glyphs.
showcased 3 glyphs here on the stream, and we're adding in 10 new glyphs in Season of Blood. And they're not all that exact same design.
Yeah.
So yes, the design space
Yeah.
for making new glyphs.
Can do more
is
glyph?
very
Yes,
open,
can
and
do.
we'll be exploring going forward.
Already do. Do
This
more
is actually
5.
A good question.
10
We talked
10
about CC last week, which is
Can do.
from Masticaz. So what's the reduction for CC? I know you said against the player, but with an overall reduction, does that reduce the sorcerer's ability to CC enemies specifically, and then the amount applied to
I
enemies?
see.
And
No, we didn't do any changes or significant changes to outgoing CC. This is only incoming CC to the player.
Yeah.
Cool.
Not CC of you to the monster.
That's actually a really good question because I know.
Question good question. Asked directly, answered directly.
Way less.
That's a good
Beautiful.
No,
That
we
was
didn't
just on the
change
player.
anything.
that was great.
We have heard a lot of feedback.
Why we even have blue
players
glyphs? I don't know.
about,
That's a good question.
Sometimes you just get.
That seems like something that should have mattered a long time ago.
And
Like
all
maybe
the
there was a
CC
version of the
games are
game
actually
that had
different in the
glyphs available at
so
level
you'll
1.
have to read more about that.
But since they
from
unlock at 50, like
Microtransaction.
why?
DM. Know who DM is? He's a Diablo partner that we have. How many total new legendaries and new unique items are coming in season 2? Any new Uber uniques? Yes, there are all 3 of those that are being added. And
New legendaries, new uniques, not new.
Not Uber
Not an
uniques.
Uber.
Yes,
Not
sorry.
new. Yeah.
That is all in the patch notes.
Yep.
So you'll read them in the patch notes.
Yeah, you'll get to see them very soon. I don't have the exact number off my head.
I think
know
it's
a pretty
18
good amount.
total, I believe.
18.
Yeah, there's 5 class legendaries, 5 class uniques, and then 2
Some
generic
extras
legendaries
on
and
there.
6.
Instead of
6
us just randomly
Yeah, I
guessing,
don't want to give you a
can read
raw
them.
number.
Okay,
You'll
yes.
see it really
Sorry,
soon.
yes, yes.
There's a good number.
Check the patch notes. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to take one more question here. This is from Cropier. With the changes to damage buckets, it'll be much harder to just stack very high damage to overcome some of the hardest content like Uber Lilith. You
Yes.
plan to make adjustments to bosses to account
Yes.
for lower damage ceilings.
Oh, how far do I want to go into?
How do you feel about D4? Season 2 looks good. Looks
had a lot
good.
of conversations about this. Yeah, I'll get all right. So, yes, we did look at monster power and boss power, and specifically Uber Lilith as well.
And what did you
Why don't
do?
we talk about Uber Lilith tuning, because we did actually tune her a little bit specially in the Season of Blood and going forward. So our idea with tuning Uber Lilith and this aspirational, very difficult content, right?
I tried Necro Minions.
Right?
The minion changes
when
are
the game
good.
came out, Uber Lilith obviously was very, very hard. Right, like I say, her power level's up here, right? Everything else, like comparably, is somewhere around here. She's ridiculously crazy hard. Really, the only builds that were able to beat her were builds that had either like really, really strong interactions, like Bone Spear Necro, where it was just like really, really overtuned, or ones that were bugged, right? Where they just got like 100x more power than other things, and it wasn't really.
Well, the scaling changes alone are going to make everyone weaker.
Aspirational content to live in that space where like only oversights can really beat it comfortably. Our goal for it was always that most builds would be it was kind of an achievable goal, but it was hard. And obviously having that balance in a multiplicative scaling game is really hard, it turns out. Yeah. In Season of Blood, one thing that is really nice and is an advantage to all of these overhauls that we're doing to our math and the power level of the classes is that before, like we talked about, the difference of multiplicative power of the crit Volin and everyone else was crit Volin was way up here and could compete with her. Everything else couldn't really. So you kind of were forced into these builds to have a fair chance at the fight, which isn't really the world that we want to live in. Now that we've kind of, stabilized the ground of all the builds, they can't, in theory.
This is true.
Can't get as crazy of a difference in power
You've
levels
created
between each other.
ceilings for everything, so now it's easier to balance the existing things.
That
True.
they can be more stable as far as who can beat them. So we took a look at Uber Lilith, and you'll see that we've tested her internally with builds that aren't those ones that we know are crazy, and tuned her to a degree where we believe these average builds will be able to defeat her. Obviously, there will be variance. Like I said, the top ones, the bottom ones there will be some, but it'll be much more in line with one another. So we did take a look at that specifically, and we do believe that just the foundation of the game as a whole will mean that more players and more builds will be able to do more content.
Yeah, it goes back to what I was saying in the damage bucket discussion, was that our intention is not to just bring everyone down. It's to open up the room for more builds to reach that same level of power. Let more builds take on Uber Lilith and not just have to rely on either crit vulnerable.
I mean, they did bring everyone down.
Rely on bugged interactions.
And at the end of the day,
but they brought some things down more than others, and they brought the enemies down with it. So the end result is that it's more unique and spread across, like more breadth. But they did bring everyone down.
Even just changes that you guys had already talked about regarding like resistances and things like that. That will also be
like the foundation of everything is different. I think overall it'll be more achievable.
Awesome. Well,
that slow down gameplay. I mean, if the enemies come down to the same amount, then technically no.
A bunch of designers,
right?
Go into numbers and math and everything for.
Cool. Okay. Well, there you go. That is overall, it's good. It's good. I think there's a lot like let's see. There's like his forehead, get owned. There's the good stuff over here, and there's a good list of things. Like there's just a bunch of bulleted stuff, like nice caps on scaling things that were out of control, nice cleanups on items, stats being better, improvements to gear, new gear, target loot farming, a big list of things. But there's also a smaller list of trust me bros that like we'll call this the trust me bro list that are kind of amorphous that we don't know about right now, right? Like what did they do to overpower? How did they scale monster power to meet the fact that everyone got mega nerfed? Like if everyone gets super nerfed and they just said, hey, we tuned it. We don't know how well they tuned it or how good that is, how that's going to look, right? Like our boss is going to be, in line with that. Like, is that all going to make sense? There's a lot of trust me bros going on here, but there is a good list of things that I think that are really strong, and I think will make the game feel really good going into season 2. And then if they hit even a percentage of these trust me bros, or at least if they can get these trust me bros to be where they want them to be within the first few patches, I think season 2 could end up being really good. But If you enjoyed yourself today, leave a like down below. You can support me and my work on Patreon and view Patreon exclusive content, link in the description. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.